everyone, and thank you for being here. Today I will be sharing a presentation on Anne Frank and the Diary of a Young Girl. This isn't just a history lesson or a children's literature presentation. It's a reflection on identity, censorship, and the power of a child's voice. Let us move on. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this presentation includes references to war, persecution, censorship, and immigration raids. Some content may be emotional and intense. My goal is to foster empathy and respect dialogue, especially around experiences of marginalized children. So, without further ado, viewer discretion is most definitely advised. Before we get into this slide, I want to read you an excerpt from Anne herself, from her book. This is a passage dated October 9th, 1942, and she is writing to Kitty. Kitty was an imaginary friend of hers that she wrote um, to honor her thoughts, essentially, because at that point she was writing in her diary, but it was easier for her to express herself as if she was writing letters. So, without further ado, let's continue. Have you heard of the term hostages? That's the latest punishment for subduers. It's the most horrible thing you can imagine. Leading citizens, innocent people, and regular people are taken prisoner to await their execution. If the Gestapo can't find the subduer, they simply grab 5 hostages and line them up against the wall. You read the announcements of their death in the paper, where they're referred to as fatal accidents. Fine specimens of humanity, those Germans, and to think I'm actually one of them. No, I guess that's not true. Hitler took away our nationality long ago, and besides, there are no greater enemies on earth than the Germans and the Jews. Another passage is dated January 13th, 1943. It's a Wednesday. She again is writing to Kitty. Terrible things are happening outside. At any time of night and day, poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. They're allowed to take only a knapsack and a little cash with them, and even then they are robbed of these possessions on the way. Families are torn apart. Men and women and children are separated. Children come home from school and find their parents have disappeared. Women return from shopping to find their houses sealed and their families gone. The Christians in Holland are also living in fear because their sons are being sent to Germany. Everyone is scared. Every night, hundreds of planes pass over Holland on their way to the German cities to sow their bombs on German soil. Every hour, hundreds or even thousands of people are being killed in Russia and Africa. No one can keep out the conflict. The entire world is at war, and even though allies are doing better, the end is nowhere in sight. I first read Anne Frank's diary in 8th grade, and her voice has stayed with me ever since. Her writing is raw, relatable, and resilient, especially for children who feel silenced or unsafe. Her story speaks directly to young readers facing deportation, cultural hatred, and identity struggles. It helps them feel seen. It's like a piece of artwork where they can unload their feelings. And while this book is part of New York State curriculum, it's banned in other states. That contradiction makes it even more urgent to discuss. Anne's diary reminds us that even in the darkest of times, a child's voice can shine through with truth, courage, and hope. And making sure that her book is accessible to young readers is almost guaranteeing that our children have a place to go when they feel the same things that Anne felt. to make sure that I read you the excerpt from January 13th, 1943 before we get into this video, as it is definitely parallel to our reality. Just weeks ago, during a federal immigration raid in Chicago, a neighbor shielded a terrified 7-year-old Venezuelan girl from ICE agents and her mother. The girl hid under his bed, echoing Anne's own experience of hiding from persecution. This real event shows how children today still face fear, displacement, and the need for protection. Anne's story isn't just history, it's a mirror. So I played that portion of the video mostly mostly so that way maybe the depth of Anne's words can echo a little bit more in our memory as we watch the news. And I think that her being a child speaks volumes as well, because hearing her explain and express what she went through at those terrible moments in January might even give us a place of solace as adults. And it's important to keep her story in mind as events like what happened in Chicago on September 30th continue to happen and continue to be forced into our faces on the media, through media, I should say. And instead of being numb to what we are seeing, it's important to be able to use our own personal discernment and personal understanding that our children are also experiencing these moments, much like Anne did herself. And in having a place to land after going through something like this, as in reading a book like this with your children after experiencing something like this, might be a tool for healing that if we are unable to access or have access to her book, we wouldn't have that tool otherwise. So with this book being banned in many states, it's important to amplify her voice more now than ever, especially considering what we are seeing right now happen almost daily in the States. All right, moving on. This is slide 5, and we're just going to do a quick historical overview. Obviously, we are talking about the topic of World War II and the Holocaust. Anne's diary was written during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. In this time, Jewish, Muslim, and Polish peoples were definitely persecuted, deported, and forced into concentration labor camps, as well as murdered. There was an excerpt in her book that I thought was pretty prevalent that we should read before we move on. It is dated November 19th, 1942. Mr. Dussel has told us much about the outside world we've missed for so long. He had sad news. Countless friends and acquaintances have been taken to their dreadful fate. Night after night, gray and green military vehicles cruise the streets. They knock on every door, asking whether any Jews live there. If so, the whole family is immediately taken away. If not, they proceed to the next house. It's impossible to escape their clutches unless you go into hiding. They often go around with their lists, knocking on those doors where they know there's a big haul to be made. They frequently offer a bounty, so much per head. It's like the slave hunts of the olden days. I don't mean to make light of this. It's much too tragic for that. In the evenings, when it's dark, I often see long lines of good, innocent people accompanied by crying children walking on and on, ordered about by a handful of men who bully and beat them until they nearly drop. No one is spared. The sick, the elderly, children, babies, and pregnant women are all murdered and marched to their death. We're so fortunate here, away from the turmoil. We wouldn't have to give a moment's thought to all of this suffering if it weren't for the fact that we're so worried about those we hold dear, whom can no longer help. I feel wicked sleeping in a warm bed, while somewhere out there my dearest friends are dropping from exhaustion or being knocked to the ground. I get frightened myself when I think of close friends who are now at the mercy of the cruelest monsters ever to walk this earth, and all because they're Jews. Take a second before we move on. Anne's diary was written while her family was hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam. They remained hidden for over 2 years in a secret annex. Her writing captures daily life, cramped quarters, fear of discovery, and her emotional growth. In 1944, the annex was raided. Anne was deported and later died in Bergen-Belsen. Her father, Otto Frank, survived and later published her diary. Since then, it's been translated into over 70 languages and continues to educate and inspire. And I think that is the most beautiful part of this whole story. That even though she herself eventually saw the same fate as what she wrote about in her own diary, her story still lives on. And that, I believe, is the most important part when it comes to making sure that this book is accessible to children, especially in America, especially right now. Before we move on, I want to point out that the top picture is actually what it would look like if a Nazi soldier was to come into a Jewish home and raid their home. That is the aftermath. Very, very much similar to what Chicago civilians and residents of that apartment complex experienced on September 30th. And below is actually the annex that Anne and her family hid in. They had a secret passage in there, which I just thought was a pretty cool picture to share, even in spite of everything. I'm going to read from her book now, dated March 7th, 1944. In spite of everything, I wasn't altogether happy in 1942. I often felt I'd been deserted, but because I was on the go all day long, I didn't think about it. I enjoyed myself as much as I could, trying to continuously or unconsciously trying consciously or unconsciously, to fill the void with jokes. Looking back, I realized that this period of my life irrevocably came to a close. My happy-go-lucky, carefree school days are gone forever. I don't even miss them. I've outgrown them. I can no longer just kid around, since my serious side is always here now. She later writes on in the same passage, at such moments I don't think about all the mercy, but about all the beauty that still remains. This is where Mother and I differ greatly. Her advice in the face of melancholy is, think about all the suffering in the world and be thankful you're not part of it. My advice is, go outside to the country, enjoy the sun and all the nature has to offer. Go outside and try to recapture the happiness within yourself. Think of all the beauty in yourself and in everything around you, and be happy. I don't think Mother's advice can be right, because what are you supposed to do if you become part of the suffering? You'd be completely lost. On the contrary, beauty remains, even in misfortune, if you just look for it. You discover more and more happiness and regain your balance. A person who's happy will make others happy. A person who has courage and faith, will never die in misery. Yours, Anne M. Frank. Wanted to take a second and read that passage before we get into why she's still a historical voice, because although she faced the same fate that she wrote about in sadness, her honesty and her earnest in her writing is a voice that I think a lot of adolescents, especially older middle schoolers and freshmen, can resonate with while they go through changes or even experience what students experienced in real time September 30th. Barely a month ago, only a few weeks ago. Anne's writing is honest, it's humorous, and it's emotionally raw. She connects with young readers because she doesn't hold back. Her diary is used in New York classrooms because it's beautifully illustrated in the movie Freedom Writers. If you take a second and you get the chance, I highly suggest the Freedom Writers. I'm going to try to get the next slide to work so the videos work. I borrowed a couple clips from YouTube about from the movie because we just don't have time. But yeah. Her story still matters. It speaks to students who feel unsafe and unheard. Even though it deals with war, it's considered children's literature because it's written by a child for children. So this, I highly suggest these two clips, but the PowerPoint itself, I have not learned the proper way to skip the ads with forcing everybody to stay here even longer. So I highly suggest everybody take a second and watch these on their own. But if you don't get the chance to, it's okay. I just also want to take a second and read something from Anne's book, dated February 23rd, 1944. As long as this exists, I thought, this sunshine and cloudless sky, as long as I can enjoy it, how can I be sad? She's an inspiration to younger voices. Dream big, even when things feel out of control, and there is no correct way to be oneself. And these two clips definitely portray how students struggle every day in ways that educators couldn't even imagine. And all of the students in this movie, I'm trying not to give too much away in case you haven't watched it, because it's such a good movie. But if all of these students finally find some common ground through Anne's story, every single one has a different background. Every single one comes from different circumstances, but they all finally learn how to empathize and sympathize with each other through each other's struggles by reading this book and writing through their own diaries, writing just passages that they weren't even graded on the content of their diaries. They were graded on their participation. And they slowly created bonds within each other that otherwise wouldn't have happened, because social cues at that time kind of all taught them to stay with your crowd and don't go out of it. It was rooted in racism, and these kids got to experience firsthand a student who was younger than them that experienced similar things And they were able to put their differences aside and become awesome people, man. Their stories, they are still very relevant. The teacher herself actually followed them through high school and into college and made sure that she was there through all of their successes. And I highly suggest looking into the movie and looking into the real story and the book. Oh my gosh, the book, girl. The book is a good one. But yeah, another passage I would like to read to you is actually, hold on, from the end of her July 15th, 1944 entry. So if you're wondering whether it's harder for the adults here than the children, the answer is no. It's currently not. Older people have an opinion about everything and are sure of themselves and their actions. It's twice as hard for us young people to hold on to our opinions at a time when ideals are being shattered and destroyed, when the worst side of human nature predominates, when everyone has to come to doubt truth, justice, and God. I think that that passage speaks volumes to the students in these two videos. Again, I'm sorry I can't get the videos to work unless we want to be here for an hour. Because the ads, man, they were just messing with me. But I highly suggest them on your own time. She's right. When a younger voice is speaking to us, even if it's a historical voice like Anne's, it's important to listen because kids might have a new perspective on something that the adults have opinions about. I want to take another second to bring up what happened September 30th, as it is very important not to let stories like this just get swept under the rug when it comes to the media cycle and how much we are exposed to on a daily basis. I want to read you a couple of our friend's own words. He has chosen to keep his identity anonymous for safety reasons, and I honestly can't even blame him. But in his own words, "I didn't want them to take her," said the man who didn't want to be named because he fears he'll be targeted by federal authorities for his actions. Almost like Anne's in hiding was worried about the Gestapo targeting the people that were hiding her. "I gave her my bedroom and I just told her, just stay here, don't open, shh, just stay quiet." Much like Meep felt herself doing in regards to Anne. At one point, when he went outside to check on things, he said, "I shouted to him, 'Shut my door! Get the fuck inside and don't open my door again.'" The man had befriended the mom and the girl in the building laundry room. They are among a group of Venezuelan immigrants who moved in over the past year, and some with state rental assistance for asylum seekers and others without a lease, according to the longtime resident. I'm going to read part of Anne's passage that we were just reading on the last slide. It's dated from July 15th, 1944. It is at the very end of the passage. "It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem absurd and impractical, yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart." In the movie, The Freedom Riders, we get to see the students go and actually meet guys, and we get to sit down and talk to her, and one of the students calls her a hero. He stands up and he says, "You are my hero." And she says, "No, I am not a hero. I am just someone who did the right thing." And I think that is a big lesson that we all should take, if anything, take that from the presentation itself, that even in moments of absolute terror and unjust, there are little lights and there are little ways that you can make an impact and stop or pause an atrocity for someone. Much like Meep and her family did for Anne. And this man did for that family. I would like to take another second and pause and just kind of remind everyone what actually happened the night of broken glass. On November 9th into the 10th, in 1938, Nazis forced into Jewish homes. They attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. This event is known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, and it marked a turning point. Anne was 9 years old, and her family fled from Germany soon after. They fled to Amsterdam, and you can actually go walk Anne's home there. They have turned it into a museum in her and her family's honor, much like her book. Uh, Kristallnacht reminds us how quickly hate can escalate when normalized by governments and through censorship of the media, by forcing it in our faces and in a almost normalized way. It then dehumanizes it for us, especially in the media, where we just kind of go from being exposed and shocked to exposed and, oh, it's happening again, much like Germany and Germans did at that time. It helps us understand why Anne's voice and voices of children today must be protected. By making sure that we are well aware of the historical events that took place and we keep that knowledge in our memory, we can make sure that we are advocating the right way for students, for children, for residents next door. That is important. So, as heavy as this topic is, this is one thing that we can't just shield ourselves from. We must remember. I want to take a second and review why Anne Frank's story still matters. Her voice, it still matters. Her growth as a writer shows emotional maturity and resilience, much like many adolescents experience in that time, in that age. Her honesty gives readers a window into an inner world of a child in crisis, a child in exile, a child in persecution. Her story resonates with students facing exclusion or identity struggles. The biggest impact is the censorship. By censoring voices like Anne, we are censoring voices that a generation can lean on, especially now in everyday American communities. Voices that would help our children find theirs. By silencing her voice, they are silencing empathy and truth. Anne's story remains deeply relevant to students today because it reflects the lived experiences of many young people navigating fear, displacement, identity, and as a stateless child facing deportation, Anne's voice resonates with migrants and refugee students who feel caught in a system beyond their control. Her diary offers a personal lens into historical injustice, helping students connect emotionally to events that might otherwise feel distant or abstract or too hard to conceptualize. Youth literature that explores trauma like Anne's diary serves as both a mirror and a window. It allows children to see themselves in stories and understand another's pain and with empathy. Reading and writing with trauma as a core crux to your content, it can help a student process difficult emotions and build resilience by helping them dissect their own experiences. Educators increasingly use these texts to create a safe space for healing and dialogue, especially in communities affected with poverty, violence, or exclusion, even deportations nowadays. Much like we can see in the movie The Freedom Riders, Anne's diary belongs in the classroom, not just as a historical artifact, but as a tool for emotional growth, and an example of how a diary is a great way to self-explore. Anne's story isn't just a historical artifact, it is a tool. When her story is banned or censored, we risk silencing a child who still speaks to millions, denying a student's chance to learn from her truth, denying their chance to heal. And acknowledge that I borrowed these two pictures from the Anne Frank Museum website, and this is a look into what the annex actually looked like and how it was hidden. So in a previous slide, I showed you the outside of the building. On the inside of the building, there was this room where they had storage, and it was basically a secret door, and the Frank family hid behind the door for many years. In several U.S. states, Anne's story has been banned or challenged. Some say it's too mature or sexually explicit. Yet many of these same states allow child marriage, which is a contradiction that I have a hard time dissecting myself, because if a child that is 12 or 13 is allowed to marry and then thus take on wifely duties, why is she not allowed to read Anne's story, which is not as explicit as that? If that makes sense. Doesn't it make sense to me? This contradiction raises urgent questions. How can a child's diary be too dangerous to read while laws remain still permit children to be married under legal loopholes? Silencing Anne's voice reveals that censorship is about control and not safety. All right, moving on. I want to take a second and point out how New York State has a strict Holocaust curriculum, which I think is awesome, personally, in my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. I just think it's pretty cool that New York State stands up for that. Um, it's education that's required by law. It's taught in multiple grades and integrated across subjects. So it's introduced in middle school and integrated throughout Global 1, Global 2, and then into senior and junior and senior histories. Actually, I remember a couple of my students, when I was observing, were writing theses on the Holocaust, Anne Frank, and individual concentration camps, amplifying stories of people who actually were implemented, that they themselves were related to, because a lot of Jewish immigrants came to America after the Holocaust and found solace in New York State, which is one of the reasons we have such a strict curriculum, which I think is pretty cool, because if we have generations in New York State who have elders in their family who are still alive that experienced these atrocities that 80 years ago. I mean, we got to put that part into perspective. This wasn't 100 years ago. Anne's story isn't even 100 years old yet. So for a lot of students, this is only 2 generations ago, and they are still living with survivors. So I want to praise New York State for a second on their strict curriculum when it comes to the Holocaust. Texts like Anne's Diary and Night by Elie Wiesel, I think I'm pronouncing her name wrong, Wiesel, helps students understand civic responsibilities and human rights, which is true, because stories like Anne Frank's and Night help students dissect the Constitution and help them understand their rights that are written out for them, which I think is really cool too. Even though Anne didn't live in America, by introducing stories like Anne's, or another story that I was going to touch base on, but I didn't have enough time, The Hate U Give, also amplified into a movie. A very good story for students in America to read and then maybe even get the chance to watch with parent permission even. And I highly suggest that one too. I think it's part of most of college curriculum. I know it is for the class in which I'm actually making this presentation for. So, but yeah, I hope you guys read that one too. But stories like that, the curriculum, if we put it into our curriculum, it ensures that Anne's story is not forgotten, along with many other students that have written stories of times in which they were persecuted or ostracized. And I think that is another takeaway that we should keep in mind, or at least keep in memory. That you guys have sat with me and watched this entire video and participated in this entire presentation. Maybe you've even taken a second to explore the 2 videos in which we could not get to work at this moment. I want to take a second and reflect, and I want to ask you, what happens when we ban a child's voice from a classroom, especially one that helps other children understand fear and identity? How does literature shape empathy and the way that we see ourselves and others? And for us who are learning online, I want to ask you, write about a time that you felt silenced or misunderstood. What would you say if someone was truly listening? I want to take a second and say thank you for listening. Anne's story is not just about a diary. It's not just about a child. It's a legacy. It's history. It's understanding. It's empathy. It's a place for students to land and heal. If I have taught you anything, I hope I have taught you at least something about her. I want to thank you for joining me. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this extremely long video. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Drink water.